I hesitate to lecture you about science, Professor Neil deGrasse Tyson. I really do. But I'll tell you why not. Because what they've already tried to do this. They've already tried to reduce hormone levels. What it doesn't do, that process, is reduce body mass or strength, which comes from the male.
What's going on, you guys? We have Piers Morgan getting absolutely schooled by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Piers is wanting to sneak in these fascist right-wing talking points. Neil deGrasse Tyson is shutting it down. I'm going to play the clip as well as give my commentary. Let's watch.
Through the world's complexities. Neil, let's talk about gender. Gender is probably the most divisive theme in the world right now. It's almost like you can't even talk about it without people losing their minds. And I guess at the center of it is this core belief, which many put forward, that there is a biological science towards sex, and then there is gender. And that is an identity issue which is separate to sex and biology. What is your view of this, and why has it got so toxic, and what is the way through this debate?
Yeah, so I think I have some insights there brought to you by how we end up classifying things in the universe. In the universe, very few things are discrete in what they are. There's, in almost all cases, a continuum between one kind of object and another. Now, it's hard to have conversations about continua, so you divide it up into as many categories as is sensible, and then you have a way to discuss what's going on in the universe with others. So here we have human beings, where, let's go back to the bio part of this, where you have the chromosomes, X, Y. There's intersex, where one of the chromosomes is doubled up. No one is arguing that. Just give that to the biologists, and you can call that what sex? Is it male sex or female sex? I don't have a problem with that. What I do know is that in the real world, in a free country where, because I remembered some document that said the pursuit of happiness, it seems to me freedom, which is so heavily championed in the West, is accompanied by a pursuit of happiness. Okay. That's foundational to what I'm about to say. So, we all know growing up that in the classroom, every year, there were girls who were a little more tomboyish. In fact, tomboy, who came up with that word? They're really tom girls, right? A tomcat is a boy cat. A tom girl would be a sort of a boy girl, right? I don't know where tomboy came from, but there were tom girls. They didn't wear skirts. They wanted to play in the mud with the boys. We know they existed. There were boys that were slightly effeminate relative to the others. We know they existed. And so, but we had words for them. They were ridiculed, whatever. We live in a time now where people are emboldened to say, you know, today I feel part female and part male, all right? So today, in fact, I will be neutral to you. I will be androgynous. But you know something? If you're trained in this, you gotta be A or B, you gotta be a boy, you gotta be a girl, you know what you're doing? You're taking your inability of your human mind. By the way, this is true for all human minds, because we gotta categorize. We always have to categorize, all right? It makes it easier to think about it, but in the end, it's just lazy, all right? So you say, boy or girl, are you a boy or a girl? And then someone is androgynous, and it makes you feel uncomfortable. But just because you feel uncomfortable, does that give you the right to come back to a person who's expressing their freedom of self?
It doesn't, but I think what I would say, right, but what I would say to this, here's where it gets more complicated. Take the issue of transgender athletes in women's sport, for example.
Okay, I got two more sentences and I'll jump right into that.
Okay.
I just want to set the table here. Yeah. I'm setting the table where, okay, that if we allow gender to appear on a spectrum, gender expression to appear on a spectrum, as is apparently the case in the real world where people have the freedom to do so, then for you to put your limited capacity to think on a spectrum in a law that inhibits the freedom of others, that's not a free country. Okay, so now take it.
And for those who are used to dealing with, conservatives and right-wing thinkers, you can see the point at which Piers Morgan brain starts to melt, in which Neil deGrasse Tyson is starting to, trigger some type of small brain thinking going on, and Piers is, wanting to make sense, wanting to argue, really just out of not knowing anything.
To the next step, where do you want to take that?
Well, what I want to take it to is I don't disagree with that. I think in a free country, you should be allowed to identify whatever the hell you want to identify as. It's fine. I've got no problem with that.
Okay, so now where are you taking it?
So where I'm taking it specifically to say the issue of transgender athletes in women's sport, which I think has, in an attempt to provide fairness and equality for trans athletes, in women's sport, it doesn't apply the other way in men's sport. In women's sport, it's created a new inequality and unfairness where you have trans women born with superior, powerful male biological bodies who are beginning to beat women with comfortable ease in many sports, and yet they were very unsuccessful comparatively when they competed against other biological males as they were before they transitioned. So my question, I guess, there is, isn't that a clear case where science has to be the determining factor? Because if you remove that from this equation, then you end up with gender-neutral Olympics and women don't ever win an Olympic medal again.
Well, there are certain events that the men, like the uneven bars, you won't find men on the uneven bars. It doesn't work with male physiology. On that one. Okay.
But my point being, there are reasons why we divide the sexes in sport, is my point. And the moment you start allowing gender identity to overcome biology, I see there's a problem.
Okay. So all that means is we are on a frontier that has not been previously breached, which is, what do you do in a sport where now there's an inherent advantage or disadvantage based on the rules that existed for that sport, whereas previously those advantages or disadvantages didn't exist. So this is not complicated. In high school, in college, and a little bit of graduate school, I wrestled. Okay, I was captain of my high school wrestling team and undefeated. I weighed in high school 190 pounds. Do I wrestle the 125-pounder? No, that would be unfair because I'm 65 pounds heavier, twice as strong, and maybe even faster. So they set up a rule. I only wrestle people my weight. Wrestling has 10 weight categories to make it an interesting contest. Okay, so let me just make this up now, just as a starter point. The transgenderism usually involves hormone readjustments, okay? Testosterone, estrogen. And so we can imagine a future of sports where you're not contesting men against women, you're contesting people in certain brackets of hormone levels. And why not?
Because it doesn't work.
From separating wrestlers into
and I really just want to pause the vid for a second to enjoy what Neil deGrasse Tyson had said. We are in a time that has never been here before, right? So it's not the people that are failing, right? It's not, we don't have to demonize the trans people whatsoever and say, okay, well, oh, this is you and you have to do this. And, I think that we have to look more at the system. Hey, well, can we, maybe make a change to this system? Can we see how the system is now starting to be outdated instead of wanting to change the people and keep on fitting people in these boxes that are outdated, that are simply just no longer there, that we are growing past?
I hesitate to lecture you about science, Professor Neil deGrasse Tyson. I really do. But I'll tell you why not. Because what they've already tried to do this. They've already tried to reduce hormone levels. What it doesn't do, that process, is reduce body mass or strength, which comes from the male biology.
Important. Right. If you went through puberty as a male, and then transitioned afterwards, right, then you'll have a bigger, typically bigger, stronger body.
And that's where I just think it's unfair. Look, I don't have a transphobic bone in my body.
Let's get there. I'm getting there.
I want fairness and equality for trans athletes, but there's a big but here, I think.
I'm working my way up to that. So one possibility, like I said, I'm just making this up on the fly, is you have hormone categories. If that does not solve the problem, or to the extent that it doesn't, then you put in other rules that separate who's competing with whom. Like I said, we do this all the time.
Right.
All right? And by the way, are you going to go to Michael Phelps and say, you're genetically taller, and we have a floppier, I don't know if all of this is true, but some of it is true, you have floppier ankles and webbed fingers, and so we're not going to compete you in this race because you'll have an advantage that other people don't. No, we don't do that, do we? In fact, when you really analyze it, practically every gold medal, record-setting Olympic athlete has some genetic thing going on in them that other people don't have.
They do, but my response my response to that would be that I think Serena Williams has been on record as saying that she would lose to the top 1,000 male tennis players. So my point being, you could be number 999 best in the world as a male tennis player and become immediately, if you decided to identify as a woman, the greatest woman tennis player of all time. Is that fair? I don't think it is.
Okay, so now watch. So it turns out, and I've done this, but others have done it as well, but I did it for myself to know it. If you look at world records from world-class athletes, let's say track and field, the 100 meters, men are about 10% faster. 200 meters, 10%. It fluctuates, but on average, it's about 10. The marathon, the men do it about 10% faster, okay? And you look at reflexes, it's about 10% faster. The way you have the biggest differences in weightlifting, but for speed and reflexes, it's about 10% faster. So if you wanted to find out where the top women's athlete would land among men, you look at serving speeds, for example, because that's how fast you can bring the racket to the ball, and find the point where the women's serving speeds match up with the men's serving speeds, okay? And then that's where you would land in the world rankings. What I will tell you is people pay to watch sports not for how good the athlete is, they watch sports for how good the contest is. Let's remind ourselves of this. If we only watched sports for the greatest of athletes, you would never watch college football. Never. Because the worst NFL, the National, in the London audience here, National Football League, the worst National Football League team there ever was, could wipe their ass with the best college team there ever was.
Right.
Because everyone in the professions, each one of them was the best in their college. Okay? So, but we love watching college football. Why? Because the contest is equal. And you don't know who's going to win in advance. If you knew who was going to win in advance, you would never watch the sport,
that would be,
even if it was the best.
To bring this bit of the interview to I think, a closure, I would say I get that completely. But the most important thing as a sports fan is you want to get a sense it's a fair playing field. That, I think, is really the crux of it.
So what you do is, in the future, what you would do is, so if the hormone levels categories don't work, then there are other categories, reflex categories, okay? Have people compete in reflex categories. I would love that, okay? Then there are people with pretty slow reflexes. They'll have different strategies and how they would win, and group them together. By the way, in chess tournaments, your chess rating puts you in a category where you only compete with other people in that rating.
That's
you
true.
don't compete against people where you beat them in 10 moves.
That is true.
So we are still at the dawn of how we will or should organize the future of sports in recognition of the gender spectrum. And
so there we go. Once again, Neil deGrasse Tyson, as educated in astronomy and other scientific matters, he's also very well versed in these social matters. He understands that, Neil deGrasse Tyson understands that this is an outdated system. The system has been going on for 2,000 years. That we are just starting to use different things such as, ELO, as Neil deGrasse Tyson was bringing up, what they use in chess. These different ways of gauging, okay, well, who can play who? How can we make this more fair? I believe that could lead even to more fairness going on later down the road than, how it may be set up even right now. Maybe there's a reason why this system has to change, right? Instead of wanting to hold on to the way that things are always going to be, the way that things are have always been, and, just allowing us to get complacent. We are always going to push the progress forward, as Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying, as Piers Morgan is, really having to submit to at this point. And it's funny how he doesn't bring up these issues with he brings up these issues with everyone, right? But he wanted to end the segment as soon as he started to realize he was going to lose. But let me know what you guys think in the comments.